Hello, everybody, and welcome to another interview with the artist. And today, I am very excited. We're sitting down with Syndjinn Scott. How you doing there, sir?
What's up, guys? How's it going?
It's so good to finally have you on the show. This is me being remiss because I think we had originally talked about this last year at Gen Con. That sounds
Yes.
right. It's fitting that now, almost a year to the day, we're finally making this happen. So we got there. We got there before the next time we would have been meeting up in person. So there you go.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait to get back to being able to where we're all safe and able to go out and go to cons and be able to have that camaraderie again. It's really it it's yes, Facebook and the posts and stuff will push you to do more stuff, but there's nothing like talking face to face with someone and looking at the piece right there in their hands and being able to see all the true colors that they're using and
Yep.
discuss it and hey, what did you use here? And just that that sense of being together is something really, really important for our community.
It's completely true. I could not agree more. People have asked me what's the impact to you since this all began? I always work from home. I always work from this chair. Most of my life is admittedly not very disrupted, but the thing I miss the most is the events. It's just getting to hang out, just getting to see everybody. It sucks. That's the shame. So this all cannot be over fast enough. But in the meantime, at least we get to hang out like this.
Exactly. And that's a fun one. My painting group, we just decided we're going to start doing some hangouts just with us all on camera, just sitting around and painting. I have a normal group of like 25 people. We usually meet up like every Monday, but since this whole thing started, it just kind of like really disrupted us all because we had kind of gotten into a group and we bounce ideas off of each other,
Right?
and we show each other's work. So it really is a comfortable social situation where we can improve and make our work better. And not having that personal interaction, it's really weird because, yeah, I paint the rest of the time on my own in the studio out in the garage, but it's just kind of that's my social time for painting that I was using every week, and to not have it there is just kind of, it really is trying. It's hard to keep that motivation pushing sometimes, but
Right.
with all the pieces that are out there, and I find ways to like take breaks, and sometimes it takes it. My breaks are a little bit long, but I always pull myself back around to my work and just sit down and just grind. I wish I could say I painted every day, but I'm a dad.
Well, there you
Uh,
go. Yeah, that is usually a good reason why people don't get to paint every day. Yes.
Well, I mean, my kids are older. My daughter just started college. My son just turned 18. And me and him game together, and we game tabletop together.
Gotcha.
So there's that interaction, and sometimes that pulls me away from painting every day.
Yep.
It's keeps my ideas fresh every time I sit down. Yes, I know exactly what I where I left off, but I always think about stuff in between my work points, and I try to basically I think of it as painting in my head because I'm always trying to think of new techniques or ways to present on every piece that I'm working on, even when I'm not working on it. Because if it and it can be obsessive, but I would rather go through that in my head instead of sitting down and just being like, I have no idea what I'm going to do.
Right. Right. No, there's something really organic about. Oftentimes I'll be sitting at my desk for hours and not able to paint because I'll be doing something else or working or whatever. But I'll leave whatever I'm working on there off to the side, and I just kind of stare at it every so often and start just thinking on it. Right. And there's a lot of value to just that turning it around in your head. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll always go back and just take a look at it. Even if I'm not painting on it, I'll step out to the studio and stand there and look at it and scrutinize it. And I'll pull pieces that I have painted that I've done or that other art that I have from other artists, and I'll pull them down and set them down. Like one of like some of my favorite pieces is I have a few small bits from Ben Commons, and I have a piece from Roman LaPlante, and I usually pull them down and set them down next to my work and stand back. And if I don't feel that my piece is strong enough to at least stand like visually stand up to where those pieces are,
Sure.
then I need to go back and make some adjustments. And that's how I kind of judge my own work and critique my own work against people that I really do admire. And I sit there and go, well, I need to keep it in my style, but I need to make it present more. I need everything to read. I need everything to stand up so that at least I can put it next to it and it's not swallowed up.
Right. Right. Absolutely. All right. So speaking of which, I want to go back to the beginning. Okay. So I want to take us back to the start. So what I always say, my line I've used on this show so many times, and I've used it again because I think it is true, is we have a weird hobby. And we had all of us at some point in our lives decided to sit down and go, what we would like to do is put paint on little tiny plastic, resin, or metal, people or busts of people. So I love this hobby to the depth of my soul. But how did you come about it? How did you make that weird decision, as it were?
I have at no point in my life ever not done art,
Okay.
but I built model cars and model trains. I built all kinds of models growing up. And my dad started me out with little snap tie cars and airplanes and tanks and stuff like that. And I was a huge fan of Ray Harryhausen.
Okay.
And I love the models that he did with his stop motion and the realism that he presented in these pieces. And I always wanted to get involved in special effects. And I was torn between comics and special effects. Ended up being a chef to try and pay my way through art, and I still did art all the way through. But somewhere around 84, 85,
Okay.
I think it was my young teenage years. We had a local comics convention and gaming convention. It's called Mobicon. It's in Mobile, Alabama. And I went, and they had a speed painting competition.
Okay. Got it.
And they slapped this model down, and you got painted. And they gave me this weird little swashbuckler guy from Raul Partha.
Yep. I was gonna say it had to be Raul Partha miniatures at the time. Yep.
Oh yeah, well Grenadier was around as well, but I mean, because I own a full set of the original Dark Crystal minis from Grenadier in from '81.
Wow, that's awesome.
But around '84, '85, I sat down at this table. I started painting this thing, and at the time I didn't know anything about miniature painting. I just painted models, like big like vehicles and stuff. But I wasn't really what you would call a modeler. I just built them for fun.
Yeah, sure.
And I put stickers on, and I started learning a little bit about weathering because of the special effects aspect. But I wasn't really what you would consider a modeler. Um,
So you weren't like taking
yeah,
it and trying to go like the sci-fi spaceship route or something where you're grieving all over it or something like that. You were still more sticking to the kit, as it were.
exactly.
Yep.
And then during that competition, I finished. I came in second, and I was like, "Wow!" And the guy who came in first, his name's Bill Rogers. He's a Golden Demon winner from Baltimore back in like the '90s.
Okay.
And he was one of my dad's students, and it was the only reason that I was safe because my dad was a teacher, and like a large chunk of these kids knew my dad and would watch out for me and take care of me. And it was really it was a good environment for a young kid to learn comics and
Sure.
learn games like. And he said, "So, you want to learn how to do this for real?" And I got like an hour or two of just concentrated boot camp. This is how you do a wash. This is how you do this. And he painted very GW style because that was a predominant style at the time.
Sure.
And that was what I did. I After that I just started painting like models for my friends' D&D games and stuff like that, and it really got to be a lot of fun. And so I kind of stuck with it, but I was still painting in the GW style. I had not yet. I've been in art my whole life. I've taken art classes and the like all the way through into college, and I just didn't put the two together. I considered them separate for so long,
Gotcha.
and I Rackham came around. I was painting, GW and playing Warhammer 40K, and I had quit for years. I had finally, like in '94, beat Bill Rogers in the local painting tournament, and then
There it is.
I
Yeah. Finally, the revenge. It took those years, but you got there. That's awesome.
exactly. And but the problem is I just stopped. I miss. I literally had a misspent 20s. People talk about their misspent youth. I literally spent most of my 20s just kind of just didn't care.
Right.
I was involved in a lot of things I probably shouldn't have been involved in, and it drew me away from painting minis and the like. But I was still drawing. Um, Sometime around 2001, my daughter was born, and I was living in Gulfport, Mississippi, and a buddy of mine who knew I painted, remembered when I used to paint, asked me if I was still painting. And I was at home, stay at home dad, and I was like, yeah, I still have my paints. So he brings over a bunch of Warhammer 40K stuff.
Sure. Sure.
And I got bitten. I liked the models. My original paint jobs at that point were so far below where they were when I won the competition that I was embarrassed.
Gotcha.
Truthfully, they're horrible, and I still have some of these models. I don't get rid of them. There's a horrid Space Marine painted in like green ink straight from GW right out of the bottle over
Sure.
a. It's horrid. It is just. I just somewhere along the way I just didn't have something didn't click or it just turned off. And
Can I hold? Let me. Can I ask you a question real quick?
mhm.
Let's jump in. I want to go down that. I want to deviate on that one moment. Do you purposely keep all of those old ones just to remind yourself of that time period and where you were? Like, is that a photo album to you, basically? Because that's
Yeah,
why I do the
I,
same exact thing. I have a bunch from like that same time period, and they're just horrible. And I look at them, I'm like, oh god. But I would never strip them. I'd never paint over them.
for me, it's a lesson.
Yeah.
It's a bit of humble when I look at the work that I am doing and say I'm working on a piece and I'm just so frustrated and angry about it and I just can't deal with it and I think it sucks. It's just so bad, so wrong with it. And I look at those models and go, it could be so much worse. But I mean, I painted 40K for about 3 years,
Okay.
quite a few armies. I was rotating armies for a while. I was living in Pensacola, Florida at the time. And someone introduced me to Cool Mini or Not and Rackham in one fell swoop. There's a
There
guy
it
named John,
was.
manager at the local game store. And the first Rackham model I saw wasn't even painted by Rackham. It was actually painted by Jen Haley. And I was like, wow. It was an Eric the Sybil. And I was floored.
Right.
So I started staring at what everyone on Cool Mini or Not was doing and what was going on in Rack with Rackham's models. And I started trying to emulate them. Now, remember, the only thing I understood of miniature painting at the time was White Dwarf.
Right.
Um,
And my running joke about that is their old paint articles in White Dwarf used to literally have instructions that would be like paint, shade, complete. Like complete was a step. Like that's not
yeah,
a step. That was how limited they were. Yeah, so I'm with you. I remember those articles.
I still have some of those issues. Funny enough, but I was in it and I was trying to learn something new and I was looking at all this stuff that all these people were doing. And I remember an article by Cyril Abate doing a excuse me, a Space Marine head. It was an article on Cool Mini or Not, and I had been pounding through like training my brain to dissect the colors and color saturations that people were using from what I could gather on photo
Sure.
and trying to duplicate this on a model. And because White Dwarf sure as heck wasn't doing that, it wasn't doing the same stuff. And you'd see all these, you know, European Golden Demon entries, and you're just like, what? This is you're just like, what in the heck is going on? This is you know early 2000s, and
Right.
I what was in the magazine wasn't what was winning in competition.
Right. Right. There was such a delta in this time period. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for people who weren't around and didn't like Rackham was like a meteor strike for me the first time I walked into a store and saw what those minis looked like and saw how people were painting them. I mean, it blew me away because it was completely different than everything I knew.
I still own like three of my Rackham war bands, still painted. They're in a case. I don't touch them. I still have a lot that's unpainted. Some of the original metal stuff, and I'm doing it a little bit at a time just because I want to utilize the techniques that I'm doing now on the stuff on those models, just to just have that difference of feel.
Right.
Uh, but Rackham was mind blowing for me, honestly. And I dove headlong into it, collecting, buying the Cry Habits, practicing. It was the first, and I find it funny that currently a lot of the individuals who worked for Rackham and painted for them are friends of mine on Facebook. And I looked up to what they were doing. It was so inspirational to me, and to have them even consider me remotely a peer is humbling. It really is something that it, I it makes me feel like I'm living in a dream when I'm at a gaming convention because I get to talk to these guys. Because
Right.
let's be honest, at Adepticon we have the best of the best
Right.
who
Yep.
show up, and to be able to sit down and talk to these individuals and learn from them, even in passing, just a hint there, or being able to dissect their work visually and let it inspire me to try new and different techniques, is one of the things that I'm missing about not being able to go to these cons.
Right.
But after Rackham, I started learning about. I found War Machine because um, after the pre-painted plastic models from Rackham came
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
me a lot of my people just kind of, we still played the game from time to time. We were playing skirmishes here and there, but it just eventually just didn't work for us. It wasn't something that we enjoyed the ability to paint the models, and the plastics that were being used did not have the depth of detail,
Right.
in my opinion, that the original pewter models did. I really would have liked to have seen a move over to resin, but that wasn't in the cards. They did only a few resin releases, and they were busts and larger pieces. But after that, I found War Machine, and that was my skirmish game at the time. And I had also found a historical modeling show in the area, and it was a Pensacola Miniature Figure Society, or now known as the Panhandle Miniatures Figure Society.
Okay.
And, it was run by the group, and it was kind of centered around Bogey's Hobby House, and we I really learned more about historical models at the time, and I learned about judging in an open system. That was my first foray into that, and I judged for about 2 3 years, and then I quit again. I had a job that was requiring me to work an extremely large amount of hours that I didn't have time to. I literally did not have time to paint. I could have found time on the weekend, but with a family, you have to, that time's already taken up.
Right. Sure.
And so I stopped. Um, and then I moved to Colorado, and that was about 9 years ago. And I met Jennifer Kaufman, Liliana Troy, Michael Proctor, um, and some really amazing artists out of the Denver area. And for a while, it was conducive to my growth as an artist. But I started having some resentment issues, and those were my person. That was all me. It was all my. It was my own stuff going on, and I moved up here to Greeley and started coming to the Crystal Brush.
Yep.
And I put in my first model was a weird miniatures samurai standing under a torii gate, like going up to a temple. And I had done some groundwork and the like to it, and I really had pushed myself to where beyond where I was at the time. It was like the mod. It was I was still painting kind of a mixture of historical and Rackham and White Dwarf styles, all kind of blended together. But I hadn't really started. It hadn't cinched in on me to utilize the techniques that I learned in fine arts in my miniatures. It
Gotcha.
just still didn't connect. And
So
then
was
I
this like the period of metal from Weird? Is this still like the Metal Samurai, or was this the second version release where everything went to plastic? Like which version, which area was this? Okay.
it was a multi-piece plastic. It's the samurai that doesn't have a face, and you can
Yep.
put a mask on him. Yeah, he's great
Love
model.
that
I've
model.
seen him again, um, just because I know I could do more with him now than I did then. Um, but I met Jose, um, Big Child Creatives,
Yep.
and he saw something in my work and started talking to me. And it was other than knowing people personally, he was the first person whose work that I was like, other than Jen Haley, whose work that I had seen and went, oh my god,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and, and who paid attention to me. Um, and he just threw me some hints and really just he tried to mentor me a little and just give me some hints to try and push me to do something different. And he introduced me to Alfonso online, and I started looking at Alfonso's work, and I was like, all right, cool, cool, cool. And I started working, trying to figure out that that kind of look of things, but
Mm-hmm.
I still wasn't feeling where I was coming from.
Okay.
Then I met Ben Comets and Kirill Kenna, and we met online due to Kirill doing a video for Painting Buddha, and it was the Scotsman.
Gotcha.
And we chatted a little bit over on Facebook and stuff, and it was really cool. And I met Michael Bartels through that because he was over Painting Buddha, and we made plans to meet at the next Crystal Brush, and we did. And me and the two of them and Shoshi Bauer went into downtown Chicago, and start roaming around and just looking at stuff. Just really just I love looking. I look at everything through color and differentiation of textures. I look for weathering. I
Yep.
do this in real life because observing it in real life allows me to mimic it in miniature.
Yep.
I keep my phone on me. I take lots of reference shots all the time. So we're discussing, and I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. It's a city that's well over 300 years old. It's one of the oldest cities in the United States. Um, and it has amazing architecture from the French, the English, all the different people who have lived and occupied that city in that area. And so I worked fixing up houses and stuff like that when I wasn't cooking. So I understood the architecture. And we were discussing architecture, and Ben and Carol are both architects. And I didn't realize this until afterwards.
Huh.
And we were talking, and then Carol looked at me at one point and he was like, "You have a background in art, yes?" I said, "Yeah." He was like, "Well, why don't you use it?" And it was like, boom. And the lights went off. And I think Ben saw the light just go ding, 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 ding. And we all started talking. And then I started really looking at things differently,
Right.
how I wanted to paint and how my own personal artistic taste in fine art can be reflected in my minis. And when I was drawing, I was trying to make myself into a comic book artist. I started doing these very extreme Kirkaso style comic drawings where you had these really deep shadows in these areas where light hit, where it was just intense detail.
Right.
And I wanted to emulate something similar to that in my models. And I saw Khajiit, and I said, I have to buy it. I have to. And so I did. And I'm sitting there and I drilled it out and I got it set up and I painted it black and I stuck it together like a whole bunch of parts that like the pommel
Yep.
of his guitar is actually put on with like blue tack just so I could prime everything.
Sure.
And I started taking reference photos by lighting a candle near the model and setting it up in a dark room and then adjusting my camera so that I would get the lighting. And I started taking lots of reference photos and I started taking into consideration, okay, I need to be able to make the details come out and I need it to be readable. And I was like, moonlight. And so I started doing the lighting stuff. And around the same time, Roman LaPlante was working on some amazing lighting on one of his pieces. And we were discussing things back and forth. And he inspired me so much in many ways and gave me some different ways of looking at it while I was in the process of painting. I still wish I had finished mine first. But I was literally I was literally stumbling and floundering through trying to take my mental illustrated image and put it into a model,
Right.
a 3D piece. And somewhere in there, I started thinking about how I was using brushstrokes and how brushstrokes read to me when I look at a painting. And yeah, I had been talking to Alfonso, and I kind of hid some of my brushstroke stuff because I wasn't really good, and I was trying to hide brushstrokes and stuff like that. And
Sure.
I didn't feel comfortable with it, and then I finally just went, you know what? When I look at a painting, the brushstroke, the depth of brushstroke, the width, the breadth, how you apply paint That's your signature.
Right, absolutely. And it's not hidden. It's not as though somebody went to a canvas painting and said, "Oh, I can see a brushstroke in that. That's not a good canvas painting." That would be nonsensical. That doesn't even mean anything.
So for me, it was about, it wasn't the, what I began to do is start noticing more and trying to concentrate more on doing that. And Alfonso was doing, he had been, he had busted it through the, through into the public.
Right, right, right.
Fuck the smoothness movement.
Yep.
And I saw it and I went, I hope that this will allow what I'm doing to be more acceptable, or what I want to do to be more acceptable. Because I wanted people to remember the work that I was doing, not because my name was attached to it, but because my vision was there.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Because you can look at a painting and it doesn't even have to be signed. If you're familiar with the artist, you know who did it.
Absolutely.
And
And even if you don't know who did it, that painting can still have incredible emotional resonance and impact to you, and you can remember it for years. And that can be detached from the artist, and yet it still is of incredible import, right?
exactly. But I mean, and this is a little going on. As artists, we want to create. We look at the masters, and they are masters for a reason, even though they're no longer with us.
Right.
And whether we acknowledge it or not, somewhere in the back of our mind, maybe that thought of living on through our vision is something that we all want.
Yep.
I'm not self. I'll be honest. I'm honest with myself. I want my work to have influence, which is why I try to push myself as much as I do. And maybe my work isn't as technically good as many people who are out there, and I can say that and be honest about it. But I want my vision, my style, my how I see things within my mind's eye when I look at these pieces, the way my mind paints them, I want that to be there. I want that to speak for me.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's the least any of us can ask, is that the work that we put out is an attempt to reflect our own vision.
No, I think you're exactly right. And it's funny you mention, sort of the influence and stuff like that. As we'll see later, we're going to look at some of your pieces. And like I mentioned to you off the top of the show before we went live, I've got an interesting story to share with you, re one of your pieces, and it's sort of like the idea of having influence. But so that's where we are now, and obviously this year we're not getting much around of anywhere. What are you trying to challenge yourself with right now? Like, what do you find yourself working on? What do you find yourself to be like? How are you trying to grow right now? What are the items you're pursuing in your own journey right now?
I'm planning a tribute, a personal tribute to Chris Shore. I really love his box work.
Yeah.
I have a shadow box here at the studio, and some nice wood and and some pieces that I want to do, and they all seem to kind of flow together, and it's very reminiscent of one of his pieces. And it really his work inspires me, that this I put this together and it's in front of me and I can't help but look at it and go, it's just like one of Chris Shear's pieces.
Right.
So I want to do that. Um, I want to do a forced perspective box. Most of it is stuff that I'm going to have to sculpt. It's very creepy. It's imagine Norman Rockwell corrupted by H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah.
But when you look at it, you don't see anything except the Rockwell. until you change the angle of perspective slightly and you see the things in the shadows.
Oh, that's awesome. I love where this is at already. Yes, I like just I can picture so many possibilities for that in my head. That's fantastic.
But I want to do, but it's something that, and I'll be honest, it's daunting. It's scary. It's every time I think about it, I'm inspired to make sketches, but I go to the studio and I look at my stuff and I think about that piece and I'm just kind of like, it makes me nervous,
Yeah,
honestly. It
yeah,
really does because it's it's a slight twist to the box. Instead of being out of the box, it twists the box a little. And that's kind of where I want my work to be long term, um, style wise. I mean I'm my name my studio is Pickman Studios. So I'm very inspired by the work of Lovecraft and the vision through his writing that I get, the images in my head when I read his work. So my one of my favorite stories is Pickman's model.
gotcha.
And the descriptive of Pickman's work is that it looks almost natural until you look at it from a slightly different angle.
Right.
And that's kind of long term where I want to I see I want to see my work going towards. So I do a lot of sketches and try to figure out how I want to make these pieces work. And it's it's really inspired by a lot of the cigar box dioramas that I saw at the World Expo in Chicago.
Gotcha.
Those things are amazing. Some of the artists are phenomenal and they pack so much of a scene into such a small space,
Right.
and it's very encapsulated, but it's completely fleshed out and realized. And I think that as miniature painters, when we set our piece down on the table, we need to be looking at certain aspects of what we're doing. Now if we were doing historicals, I want to see I love that realism, that richness of a very realistic looking piece that I can sit there and go, wow, I can see that blown up to full size and it would look perfectly normal.
Right.
um there's an artist, Honor Guard, is amazing at doing these. And he does terrain pieces that when you're looking at them and the models are on them, they literally look like little shrunken scenes.
Right.
And I would love to see a competition where we can get people who are doing terrain, because let's be real, a lot of people look at terrain and go, oh, it's just something you put on the board to move your models around.
Right. Just
Even
it's
if
just there to facilitate gaming. It's not. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. It's just unfair. Yep.
but we have people who are so who do such beautiful detailed work in just the grass and the rocks and the small details like that. And Matt Sesh with his Joy of Basing
Yep.
on Patreon is a wonderful resource to be reaching in that direction. And that's I want to see a competition where we can do a terrain, a realistic terrain category.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Roman a little while back, and he's been doing all of his little 15 millimeter astronauts
Those are
recently, right?
dope.
They are amazing, and like every one of them, it's are little dioramas, little stories he's telling, and most of those are really more about the terrain than they are about the little astronaut, right? I mean, there are some exceptions, but like I think he just posted one today that was like the little astronaut in an orange suit, and he was on the beach, and it was like a vertical piece, but it was the
Yeah.
beach going down, and he had like the waves washing up, and him making a little, angel in the sand, right? And like
Mhm.
that the little orange astronaut is, yes, he's the figure in the scene, but there's so much, like, it's the terrain and little scene he's sculpting that's incredible there. Like the Statue of Liberty piece that he did with the bust or whatever. Like there's just so much great stuff like that.
Well, and I've been a judge plenty of times, and I know in many cases that when I look at my own work, I'm not necessarily satisfied with some of those aspects. But when I look at people like Roman's work, Honor Guard, Ben, Matt, Seth, Seth Amson,
Yep.
uh, amazing with his modeling. His groundwork is really top notch. Um, the thing that strikes me is the scatter. It's not just, hey, I've got some grass here and a few sticks here, and here's some rocks. It's fleshed out. There is detritus under the edges of the rocks. There, it's not completely uniform. It feels organic. It
Right.
feels naturally organic,
Yep.
and it's something that I personally feel that I struggle with greatly in the work that I do. Which is, and I don't do a lot of very small pieces, mostly due to the fact that I am really having issues with my vision when it comes to concentrating on like 35 millimeter figures.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I can still paint them and I'll put headgear on, but it's just, I can only paint for so long at that scale.
Right.
So I started going more 54, 75, and bus
Yep.
of varying scales because I can play with the surfaces and volumes more, and it it's something that I don't necessarily have to put my headgear on to paint.
Yep.
I can sit there and I can work with it, and then I can put my headgear on for finishing touches at the end. But I can paint most of the model without ever having to put a magnifier on, and I don't get headaches from
It
larger scale pieces.
it also just often feels more comfortable. I don't know what it is. Like for people out there who are watching, if you haven't painted a 54 or 75 mil figure, if you haven't done some bust painting, like I cannot recommend it enough. If what you've spent your sort of artistic life doing is painting 28 to 32 millimeter type of GW stuff or whatever game you happen to be playing, to me there's just a comfort with it. It's hard to explain. It almost feels more like you're not like I don't know exactly how to sum it up other than to say it always feels like when I'm painting at that small scale there's a tension, like you can feel it in your wrist and your back. And when you're on that, like when you're on a bigger scale or something like that, it just doesn't feel the same. You've got more kind of space to just explore. It's the weirdest thing.
For me, when I paint smaller pieces, I tend to tense up to hold still,
Right.
to have more brush control, and to keep the piece I'm working on very steady so that I can work. And I remember something that me and James Waffle were talking about is attacking your model. Don't be afraid. And that's the thing. When we paint small, we tend to tense up because we're afraid of making these mistakes.
Yep.
And so we get real tense and stressed up. And that reflects in our shoulders getting tight, our neck getting tight, our hands tightening up, and it stresses. For me, that's where my relaxation in the hobby ends. Um, when I'm painting larger scale, I can just be like, okay.
Right.
And when I paint bus, truthfully, I don't sit down until I'm doing finishing work. I literally stand up. All my airbrushing is done. I take my piece, put it on a holder, and I'm just like, and I just spray, and I'll stand up and walk around my studio and just paint and just beat out all these sketches on my models. And then when I get to start working on the actual detailing of it, then I'll sit down and I'll take the time to just kind of be more relaxed, but I can still kind of sit down and keep things more steady. I just find that I'm able to relax more with a good little bit of music going, standing up and just with a brush in my hand, reaching over to my palette and just working on a piece. And I can only do that with larger scale pieces.
Right.
I've tried it with small pieces, and it really just, I have to sit down. It doesn't feel comfortable, and I'm always afraid I'm going to drop it.
Right.
Large pieces, I'll stand, and I usually have a larger handhold, so it's harder for me to drop it. I'm just like, oh, okie dokie, and I'm just going to work. So I really, that's one of the reasons I really prefer the larger scale. And you have so much room to work, and you can do, like, I'm not the greatest fine line painter, but I really do try to get some work in. I try to improve my skills, just like anybody else. And from time to time, I have moments where I'm like, "Oh wow, I can't believe I did that." To moments where I'm going, "Okay, put it in the dip. It's got to come off," you know.
Right, right, right,
And it's just, you know, when painting on small models, I can't do that. When
right.
I'm painting on something the size of Khajiit or the Mayan or some of my other busts, I can actually take time and sit there and go and break in these areas. And I feel more comfortable doing it because I have much more room to go back and correct if I'm off.
Yep. Well, speaking of which, I don't know that there's a better transition. Let's look at some of those pieces. Let's take a look. So, it's a great setup. It's almost like we scripted this out. All right, here we go. So, let me bring this up here. So it'll cover you over for a moment. The viewers won't be able to see you; they'll just see your pieces. So we're gonna start with you mentioned the Mayan. So let's start with the Mayan. This is such a great piece. Like it's so. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody uh, like strike lighting like this. And what I loved about it was, I mean, you see a lot of the sort of um, orange and teal, and we'll talk about that in a little while and why I think that's still fantastic. But this is such a different take, and I don't like I said this blew me away when I first saw it. So tell me about this piece. What made you want to do this? Kind of what's the inspiration behind it?
I was at a thrift store, and the background, that wall
Mm-hmm.
with the Mayan priest, the bas relief, um, I actually found it at a thrift store for $1.25.
It's a pretty good deal. All right.
Sat for almost 4 years, just in my collection of stuff that I knew that I would eventually need someday, because we all have one.
Right. Right.
Um, and I saw Alan Kirkasau. I'm probably, I know I'm probably butchering his last name, but Alan C. Sculptor, um, amazing, just phenomenal sculptor, posted the Mayan bust, and I ordered it. I had to. I contacted him. I said I have to have it, and I ordered it, and it got to me, and I literally went to work immediately.
Yeah.
I knew that I was going to go to the World Expo, and I built the whole model, and I set it up, and I started reference shots, lighting it from different spots with various lighting and taking photos, and then compositing them together on the actual piece. And I wanted, I had a picture in my head of a Mayan priest right after a festival. Now, here's where the creepy comes in. We know that they sacrificed
Sure.
and they ripped hearts out, and the priest would eat the hearts of the sacrificial victims, and they were a very blood based culture, and I wanted to reflect that in the model. And if you blew it up, if you were seeing it in person, right at the edges of her mouth there's trickles of blood running down,
Yep.
and there's blood around her mouth, and I wanted to have that, there's no lights a other than a torch and wall sconce in a temple. So I wanted to reflect a Mayan priest after a festival in the temple at night with the moon shining down, and he got, a torch to move by, and the torch's light shining up onto the scene, and then the moonlight shining down. And there's actually scale 75 white alchemy mixed into the paint on in the highlights on the moon side,
Gotcha.
on the side, so that when you look at it in person, you get that little bit of scintillating shine, like you were looking at uh, moist skin under moonlight.
Right.
Um, and I was just, and the thing is it was something that I had done. I got it from an old White Dwarf magazine about mixing metallics into skin tones to give them a different feel. And then I never saw anyone actually do it. And then Alfonso did this dwarf for I forgot what company that was, but it's a dwarven warrior holding a with a shield and a hammer,
Okay.
and he's got a white beard and it's all in braids and white hair. And in his discussion of, you know, how he did the work, he mentioned about mixing some white alchemy from scale 75 into his highlights as he built it up to add that scintillating, fleshy kind of that pearlescent glow.
Didn't
And
he
he did.
design that paint set?
Yes, yes, he did.
Yeah.
For sure.
If anybody was gonna do it, I suppose the guy who made the paints. Yeah, there you go. Or made design the paints, I should say.
So when I was doing that work for the World Expo, I knew that I wanted to do something different, and nobody else other than him I had ever seen do it. So I started mixing it in, and I started putting it in, and I felt that the moon side was the best place to put that because you wanted that kind of light. But the fire, like I painted that side of the model, the warm side, completely as a historical natural piece.
Right.
Like if you could look behind it, like all the detailing of her of the face paint and everything, and the dots are all there from the light shining up onto it. And then I started picking out all my warm areas, and then I put it together, and I was looking at the backdrop, and I broke out the airbrush and started spraying my colors at different angles because it's an actual bas relief, so
Right.
it has depth. So when you spray across that, you know you've got that, it's going to catch. And then I went back and started highlighting everything, and then adding more and more and more and more, and I realized that I didn't have an orange or a yellow paint that had enough oomph to it to give it depth. So I started going and buying like orange fluorescent paints and yellow fluorescent paints and
Yep.
mixing them in and pushing those into those spots to give them that heat, that warmth that I felt that I was missing, that light that it really needed to stand out. And I got bronze for that in historical at World Expo, and that's I for me that was a turning point in my view of myself as an artist. No, I didn't get a silver. No, I didn't get gold, but bronze at the level of the World Expo to me was world shattering.
Yeah, sure.
It made me really, it made me go, okay, I'm doing something right here.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, it's a gorgeous piece. I love it. All right.
And
Next up, we have Frankenstein's monster. I think you got Adam, and I think this is from. Is this from Black Art as well?
yep,
Yep.
that's Black Bust. Um, like I said earlier, I have a distinct interest and love for special effects.
Yep.
And in doing so, I have done a lot of special effects makeups for friends for Halloween and that type of thing. I learned how to create my own silicone appliances and that type of thing. And I'll actually sculpt and then pull it off and then mold it and then use silicone and just inject it in and make appliances.
Nice.
Uh, and sometimes I'll mix flesh tone into it and then push it in, like inject it with a syringe into it, so it has that fleshy tone that I need. And so when I did him, I wanted to do an opaque, really special effects oriented, like appearance oriented piece. And that piece had so much character to it. And I just was like, okay, I know exactly what I want to do. And I primed it and just started airbrushing flesh and different tones all over the place where I felt like they needed to be. I think I finished that model in like a day and a half because it
Gotcha.
was so in my head, so like on it. I was just like, oh my gosh, and it was just felt right. And I wish I could have done better on the hair, but I think that overall the flesh is probably some of my better work. In that
Yeah,
it
I
was
really love the eyes, like, and not just the eyes themselves. I don't just mean the eyeballs. I mean like the entire area of the eyes, right? Because the dark circles, the way you've captured those, and then the transitions out, and especially on his right side, like our left, where the darkness of it is transitioning into kind of the open wound and stuff. That just looks
yep.
so naturalistic.
I didn't push my paint. Like once I got the airbrush down, everything is nothing is it's just glazes
Right.
and various viscosities just run over loosely and kind of like it's loose but controlled. Um, and then like the blood where it's dripping down and stuff like that. Those are all just really like I mixed in a little um, gloss medium
Sure.
into a master mix of like half and half red and black. Well, alizarin and crimson and black, and then I add a little bit more alizarin and crimson, and then loosened it up and watered it down and just let it flow out of the brush and left it
Right.
just to get that. I wanted it to be organic. I wanted it to have that really put together organic feel. That's one of the reasons that his eyes are two different colors. One's blue and the other one's green
Yep.
because I mean, he's Adam. He's Frankenstein's monster. He's put together from so many different pieces. And I was really kind of, I was almost playing with the idea of replacing, like doing the top of the head in a different color, but it just kind of, I, like visually in my head, it didn't feel right. So I just kind of backed off of that. But I wanted it to have that piece together feel
Yeah.
that Frankenstein's monster would have. So seeing as how I couldn't really get away with it in the actual body and head of the monster, I figured I'd do it in the eyes, and then I wanted to put the hanging ligatures around his neck. So I just kind of literally just blotted it in and let it set and dry, and then went back and blotted some more in to just create the bruising around his neck from him being hung.
Yeah.
But
It looks really good. The hanging sort of scar there, again, just so wonderfully naturalistic, right? Like it looks like that bruised skin.
thank you. I wanted. I. It definitely was a piece that, short of the hair, it fit. It. It was the piece. You know, it was literally like how I pictured it in my mind.
Right.
When I finished it, I went, well, other than the hair, it's exactly what I wanted. So, you know, when you like I said earlier, when you can get that picture out of your head and make it just what you like, exactly what you picture, did what you were supposed to do. You did what you wanted to do.
Right.
What your job was as an artist to make that vision visible.
No, it's great. All right. Next up. So this is Khajiit. And so I actually, if you don't mind, I'd love to share a story with you and with the audience real quick. So this is the piece that I first knew you for. Okay, so this is the first one that you painted that I became aware of. And 2016 Crystal Brush was my first one I attended. Okay, and I saw this at in the case, and this, I mean, when I say this blew me away, I mean, this blew me away. Okay, I really mean that in the truest sense. I uh I was describing this to people I was talking to of like you've got to see this piece of the way that the artist did like the warm light and the cold moonlight, like it's incredible the way it's captured on like I didn't ever play the game where Khajiit comes from or whatever, where that's a thing. And but I mean I'm vaguely aware of it just from pop culture. And
Yeah.
I was like, just go the cat bust, you know, like I didn't know what to call it at the time because I just seen it in the case, right? And I didn't have the cultural touch point to use the proper term. But just the way the addition of the background and the split there, just kind of that like hard line split, and then which was something I had never thought about, like ever. I had never thought about somebody using like something like that in the background, and then the way you captured the very soft subtleness, I guess is what I would say, of the orange of the fire of this kind of warm light compared to the like much more hard, strong, like powerful volumes of the cold light that's clearly like dominating from that other side, right? To the point where I could feel like he's under this full moon next to a fire or something like that, right? Or you're next to a torch in the middle of a dark city or something.
The
And
idea, the inspiration was him coming back. He's a merchant and he's just coming back into town, and he is nighttime. He's just come into his home, which is the window behind him, and there's a fire lit in the home, and he just walked in and he's standing there, and the light comes in and it crosses.
yeah,
And I just I had originally was going to put a scene behind the window, and decided that I'd rather just have the window have that bisected um, lighting across it to accentuate what was already going on in the foreground.
yes, it's so fantastic, and this piece stuck in my head for years. I mean, to this day, like I could have, I would have, like in a heartbeat, would have recalled this as one of my favorite pieces ever. And uh, it just like it inspired me in a way to think about lighting differently in miniature painting. I mean, this is the one that clicked for me, and it's funny because you mentioned like the conversation you had, right, and like why using the art and everything, and that moment, right. Seeing
Mm-hmm.
this piece was that moment for me. Okay.
That means so much to me. It really, really does. It's my heart is full. I thank you so much for that.
I
I
I'm still blown away by it to this day. I absolutely love it.
it's I keep it because it was that flashpoint for me.
Yeah.
I once I when I did it, I was just like, my mind literally was not thinking I'm painting a miniature. I'm painting a piece. I'm I wanted to feel like I was painting on canvas. And that's kind of where I went with it. It's the vision that I had in it, and it's still one of my personal favorites of all the pieces that I've done, because I always go back and look at it.
Yeah. It's truly fantastic. It's wonderful. It's an inspiration. I mean I don't want to blabber on about it for too long, and but it's worth a lot more words than what I've said here today. I by the way, I am quite positive I'm not alone in the impact of this piece. I really mean that. So it's great. Okay, so next up we've got so our charming vampire fellow here in his dandy ascot. So tell us about this guy. Is this also from Blackheart?
Is that the multicolored flesh one, or is it the larger vampire? Like the
Older gentleman, thin face, very V-shaped eyebrows, blue ascot.
That one is a black heart piece.
Okay.
Um, it was actually the first black heart model that I ever painted.
It feels
Uh,
very Hammer horror.
I It is. It's inspired offhand by it. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't say it's a direct inspiration.
Okay.
It's more like I've seen the work growing up. I was a fan, but I did wasn't thinking of it at the time when I was painting it.
Gotcha.
Um, I had just gotten the scale 75 unnatural flesh set,
Yeah.
and I was like, ooh, I want to try these. I wonder. And I had that model in my hand and I was like, let's do it. And I started pushing it. I threw the box away. I threw the instructional thing away and I just put the in front of me and went, okay, let's do this. And just went at the piece. He was originally primed solid black. And then I just started pushing color and paint on him after I airbrushed a quick zenithal
Right.
to get my light. And then I was like, okay, let's do it. And I just went in and just started putting these colors in and going, okay, I like where that's going, but I think I need to do something else. Hold on, let me change my brush stroke here and use this color and lay this down next to it. And I just kept doing that over and over again in these really thin, like almost glaze like layers and just kind of letting it get thicker and thicker as I moved along, which is usually, honestly, how Khajiit was painted, how the Mayan was painted. I start with really thin, like glaze coats, and I let them start to, as I'm painting, I let them start to get thicker. And
Right.
then I'll add in lighter tones to that and build it up. That allows me to keep my brush stroke where it is and allow me to still be able to put in textures and the like and do a glaze over it and push it back down
Right.
so it's
Right.
not too much and still allows me to control that lighting.
Well, this guy is such wonderful. You mentioned the use of that flesh tone set. The skin on this guy is just so wonderful, and I really hope that the audience recognizes just all the subtle tones you've captured. In what's great about this bust is all the details in the skin, right? Like there's nothing better than skin with like a lot of interesting detail to it. And this guy between like the wrinkles, the sunken cheeks, the heavy bags on the eyes, the sort of
It,
forehead like wrinkling and stuff, and you've just brought all of those out so subtly but wonderfully with these nice like crimsons and purples, this touch into the very vague green yellow of the skin. Like it's really nice.
I really wanted to have a lot of visual interest in the skin on the piece. The issue that I was having with a lot of the work that I was doing is um, variations of color within skin tones because a lot of times what we're doing on skins we go for the it's in a bottle and it's a flesh tone
Right.
and then we start adding a little bit here and there with it and manipulating it. But with having an entire range of 9 different flesh based colors that I could work with, I just started adding and adding. And I usually use a lot of Vallejo smoke. I mix it into,
I love smoke. It's so funny you say that. It's like yes, smoke is like one of my favorite Vallejo colors. Yeah, absolutely.
it's one of my go tos. I keep 3 to 4 bottles around just in case. I keep one in the garage. I keep one in my travel set, and then I have 2 more in my actual paint box where I keep all my paints at, and that keeps me in smoke for a while. But as soon as run out of one bottle, I go to the store and buy 2 more so that I don't ever run out because it's something that it when I do a lot of warm tone stuff, I tend to like to mix it into my warm areas. But one of the things I wanted to do with that piece was I wanted my lighted area, my warm area, to not be brown
Right.
or yellow or red or what is normally considered warm colors, which is the other side of him is deep purples and blues, so that creates the shadow that I want while being able to have that cool warm spot where the light's coming in. And if you notice, most of the rest of the model doesn't have a whole lot of light.
Right.
It has some detail on the lapel, but I didn't. But it's pushed back. I think it's pushed back chromatically enough from the skin to allow the skin to be the dominant focus of the piece, which is what I was trying to go for.
Yeah. Yep. No, it's really cool. I mean, it's just great too. The just a minor thing I want to draw everybody's attention to, and then we'll go to the next piece. Is if you look on like the upper lapel, you can see how even the way the light is capturing on that is setting one side more in shadow and reinforcing that lack of light over there and making it fall into the background and really directing your eye with another light line you created there. So it's a very minor touch, but it's a really great addition to the piece because it just creates another way in for your eye to follow and keep moving around the model. So it's little stuff like that that often just sets me off because it's such a great addition to the piece.
I There was a theory that was presented in some of the Cry Havocs from Rackham back in the day of small details on models. Like
Yep.
the idea was that if you put these small color changes here and there, like when they do their wolf, and you can see kind of a pinkish around the claw, the edge of the claw. The palms are slightly different colored, and these are small details that we we have, and they exist in the natural world because your palm is lighter than the back of your hand.
Right.
Uh, Areas where there are inconsistencies or color that need to be there, because if they're not, your brain knows something's wrong. You may not necessarily know what it is, but when you look at it, you know something's off. And those small details are those little bitty things, like a little pink around the inside of the edge of the eye when you're doing eyes
Yep.
on like larger busts and the like, or like a slight bit of magenta or red washed into the areas where you pool where you naturally would pool blood, and then you can paint those in, but you allow some of that to still register just ever so slightly, because if it wasn't there, your mind would know it wasn't there,
Yep.
and it was off. So I try to like do a piece, and then I'll step back from it and I'll look at it, and I'll walk away from it, and then I'll come back and I'll look for those little small things and try to put those in.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I think that this one captures that really well. All right. Next up, we have our, I believe this is our Lich priestess here. She's got a cup.
Yes,
And
that
she is definitely um, emaciated. But I love the I think the piece the part of this that jumps out to me, and I'll tell you right now, it's something I'm just actually there's two things I want to talk about and draw the audience attention to, and I absolutely want to hear everything about it. The first is such a wonderful skin tone. Like my goodness, this is such a great capture of the skin tone, just the way you're capturing the lighting across it. And then secondly, this is such a masterful handling, I think, of the white robes. Because so little of this is actually white, right?
yeah.
And yet, like, there's very, like, it's not, you know what I mean? Like, when you actually stop and look, you're like, wow, actually, not a lot of that is the color white. Yet, if I just glanced at it or asked anybody, hey, what color are robes, right? They would just say white. They'd be like, well, those are white robes, right? But it shows how little actual of that color you need, and all of these secondary colors that are caught in here are being captured really, really well. So I've just those two things super jumped out at me. But please, yeah, tell us about this one.
the Normally when right now I've already done one article for Amazing Figure Modeler magazine on doing African skin tones. I'm currently working on two more articles, uh, to one to put out to everyone, another one to go to hopefully another magazine. Someone had asked me about doing another article. She is the focus of a African skin tone article for dead flesh. There are greens and purples mixed into the shadows
Mm-hmm.
to create that skin tone, because it's not just brown.
Right.
And there's Indian yellow hue mixed into the browns to create some of the warm areas, and then glazed back over with Vallejo smoke to create the essence of the way the flesh drops in. Uh, the I want to teach more and more people how to properly represent African skin tones and other ethnic skin tones. So my current one of the roads that I'm running down is studying um, how to create these various skin tones using portraiture, artistic fine arts portraiture as the basis for my articles and what I want to be doing. So I can sit down and go mix this color and this color, and you can go and get a book of color theory from a library, and it's going to match. We use a lot of, right now. We're using a lot of these different. We're starting to see more and more artist color style paints
Yep.
come into miniature painting, which I love because the thicker paints last longer, they stay moist longer. You can do more with them, and the pigmentation is supreme. And you can water them down so much before you lose pigmentation that you can almost paint with a 8-to-1 ratio,
Right.
and it'll still show because of the amount of pigmentation. And that's something that I really like to see. But I also want us to start moving into looking at books on color theory.
Yep.
Because as we start studying more and more fine arts color theory and move towards mixing our colors, mixing our paints on the palette, and getting these variations in hues and tones that are organically formed by our visual senses as we mix, I think we're going to start seeing more and more movement towards pieces. When you look at them, it looks like a painting. Or just the fact that we have more variation in what we're working on. And as we explain to new people who are coming into our hobby, that they can pick up this book on color theory, this book on color theory, these are the colors that we're using, and they can look at one of our tutorials and go, hey, I know where I can get that color theory basis. It's
Right.
there. Alfonso does an amazing job of teaching people beautiful form of color theory and paint mixing. And that in and of itself can help you extend the amount of paints that you're using without having to buy every paint every 200 and some paints in a paint line.
Right.
Because you sometimes just mix, and work. Um, I like that mostly because of my fine arts background. Secondly, because when I first started painting miniatures, it was the round bottle pop top Citadel miniatures. You can get 9 in a box.
Yeah, sure.
And I had a box. I didn't have any other colors.
Right.
So I just started mixing them together, and that was just how I painted and how I attained the colors that I needed for a large portion of my miniature painting. My early miniature painting was literally mixing colors in from these boxes. And like a friend of mine got a box and he didn't want it anymore. Uh-oh, my battery's running dead. Hold on.
Okay. That's fine.
So this might be a little awkward, but I'll make it work. There we go.
All right.
So having us move towards more and more mixing of our colors, we will start to understand more and more about color theory and how our eyes perceive the light that we're seeing. And we can start working with things like mood and feeling when we're painting.
Yep.
Because those emotional bits are part of what makes our work meaningful.
Right. Right.
And emotional. and not everyone's going to see it the same. So the variations that you're going to get every time that you mix, especially if you're just doing a single piece. Now, I don't necessarily say that you should be doing that for giant armies, but when you're working on single pieces, it or centerpieces to an army, it can help to have that variation to make that pop a little bit more,
Yeah,
or read a little bit better, or
absolutely.
organic feel of pulling you into the piece.
Totally
But
agree.
I mean, mixing paints is what I mean, it is an artistic technique that leads to a better understanding of color theory and how we utilize and visualize color.
Yeah, I mean, and the more you do it, I think the more comfortable you get with obviously not just the practice of like, well, if I put A plus B together, I get C or something like that, right?
Right.
Which is fine. I mean, of course, that's what you're aiming at primarily, but there's a secondary effect here, which is you just come to understand at a deeper level the nature of these colors, right? How powerful they are just by putting them together, the effect that they're going to have, sort of what's a strong color, what tends to be a weak color. You're going to understand more like how subtle shifts in tones can happen when they're there next to each other on the palette as you're mixing them. You'll see it on the palette and you'll be like, oh, look at that. Like I can feel the slight more yellow in this mix than in this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can translate that over to the miniature in a way that you're not necessarily going to see if you're looking at a bottle, right? And relying on pre-mixed.
Well, and let's be honest, we as a community and as a art form, we paint under one light,
Oh,
we
sure.
photo under another light, and then when we show under a different light.
Yeah.
So the variation in tones and colors have to remain true from one lighting to the next. And you get that by understanding saturation and intensity.
Yeah, I know that's
Because
something that Roman Gruba is very, on about. Like when you're painting, don't just sit there under your painting light. Like stand up, take the piece, walk around your house, go into different lighting, walk outside, turn it upside down, so that way you actually have a true sense of what's going on.
I have gotten to where while I'm painting, when I'm actually like grooving in my painting, sometimes I'll take pictures outdoors,
Right.
bright Colorado sunlight, and hold it out, adjust my ISO to 100, and maybe adjust my exposure a little bit and take a picture. If I can still get the same tones, the same highlights, and the shades that I've been using that I see under fluorescent light and under LED, if I can see that under sunlight, then I think I got it where I need it to be, because that way, no matter how you look at it, or if I happen to go to a show and it's near windows and I've got sunlight coming in, I got fluorescence over the top, my piece still has, it's still color fast. It
Right.
still reads well under any of the lights. And that's one of the things that I've been trying to push myself to do a lot of over the past couple of years, because I really want that ability to be able to, no matter how we're dealing with it, even if you photo it, it's just going to always look, right on the money every time.
Right. Yep. All right. So then our last piece that we're going to look at here is Lord Vader. So obviously another very moody, lighting piece. So take us through this one.
Vader was a commission for a guy, a buddy of mine named Jeremiah Road Dog. He was doing some Twitch streams for a while, painting. I think he's back to it again now. He's out of my hometown. Funny enough, I did not. He was one of my mom's former students, and I did not meet him until Gen Con last year.
Oh wow.
I had never met him face to face, but he'd seen my work and been following me and asked me if I would paint Vader. And I told him, well, yeah, it's Vader.
Sure.
Uh, so he sent him to me, and I I was sitting there staring at the thing. I was like, Everybody else does lightsabers with a very kind of dim, very centralized light.
Yep.
It doesn't really pop off and reflect a lot. And one of the things I wanted was that pop of glow off of Vader's sword. I wanted it to look like it was just beaming. And I talked to him about it. He was like, "Do it." I was like, "Okay." So I really wanted a counter to that really bright red crimson lightsaber. And so I just started working in tones of browns, blues, and mixing in grays and whites into those to create all the lighting on the other side of Ada. I wanted that counterpoint. I wanted to create and I wanted the lighting to expand out and be precise all the way down to the base. Because even though in reality the light would not hit the base really, have that much reflection, I
Right.
wanted it to have that ambience of being menacing because he actually uses that piece in his Star Wars Legion's army.
Nice.
So it actually goes on he actually puts it on a board. So I didn't want it to just be tabletop. I wanted it to have an impact when it sat on the board. And when you see that bright, glowing, reflective lightsaber sitting on a board at tabletop level, it really punches. So during the entire time I was painting it, I would walk over to my own personal gaming board, set it down, and step back like I was playing, because I wanted it to have that impact from the board as well as up close when you held it.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it really reminds me of like the scene from the end of Rogue One, right, where the hallway's dark and then Vader, kicks on his lightsaber, and it's like that is the dominant light, right? Like it is like it is that ominous moment. Like he's a horror movie villain at that moment, and so yeah, I think you captured it really well here because it's an interesting counterpoint to what we were talking about earlier, where in the Khajiit piece the warm light is soft, right? It's the weaker tone.
Mm-hmm.
It's used in sort of a less strong way as far as like the volumes, especially that it occupies. Whereas here, it's quite the opposite, right? This red menacing, this sort of like quote unquote light from hell with the red light, right, is very
Mm-hmm.
much the dominant color, right? That's casting the entire scene and the emotion of the scene.
I wanted him to be, I wanted him to be menacing. I mean, it's Vader, dude. I mean,
Right.
Vader is menacing. He is in the Star Wars universe. He, other than Palpatine, he is the essence of the menace, the fear that you're supposed to have for the dark side. And
Right.
I want that to be reflective from tabletop to up close. And the only way to really make that have that depth of feeling to inspire that emotional content was to make that deep, that menacing, bright lightsaber.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would have just kind of. I personally feel that if I had done it less, I'd have lost something visually. I would have lost something in the process of it. You wouldn't have been able to just sit there and be like, "Oh, it's Vader." Now, when you look at it, it's like Vader.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Hundred
wanted to
percent.
have that gut. So he has the piece. I really enjoyed painting the piece. I had a lot of fun doing so. It's just I wanted it. Other than the lightsaber, if you look around it, if I sent you pictures of the other side of him as the darker side, or I should say the lighter side, um, he, I wanted it subtle. I wanted everything outside of the lightsaber to be highlighted, but I wanted it to be and to have pop to it, but I wanted it to be subtle enough that it wouldn't that my blacks didn't turn to gray.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
That was honestly for me the lightsaber was the easy part. It was creating that subtlety of transitions on the other side and on the cloak, and keeping it looking black, but still having that reflective quality. And I think that's something that, I mean, let's be honest, black is one of the hardest colors to work with, much like white and yellow.
Totally
Those are
agree.
those are like some of the hardest colors to work with, and because you have to match a balance to create that depth, like Meriton, the emaciated, the Lich Queen, the Handmaiden.
Yep.
Her white is, I started out with a light blue airbrushed on my cold side and a warm brown on the warm side to create that dichotomy, and then I went in and hit and actually mix white paint into it and start pulling it in, and then to create the folds are single strokes, like fill the brush, start at at the bottom of it and pull all the way up to the top of the thigh or at the brightest light and let it go,
Yep.
stroke, and just kept doing that until I created all those folds to allow the other colors to push through to give that temperature differentiation to white.
It's fantastic. All right, so we're gonna jump back to you. This is such great stuff. Thank you very much for sharing all this. All right, yay, welcome back. Okay, so now we're gonna close out here with the lightning round of questions. Are you ready? All right. So don't overthink them, but here we go. First question, and you must choose one and only one, and that's why this question is hard. Are you ready? Question
Okay.
one. Who is your favorite miniature painter, past or present, who isn't yourself? This is a tough one.
Oh, yeah, because I have so many.
Oh, I know. That's why I make everybody do one because if we do a list, we'll be here. We would just start naming and not know when to stop. But what's one?
I'll go with the person who helped me make my breakthrough.
Okay.
That gave me my breakthrough. I'd have to say Kirill. His use of color, texture, especially some of his newer pieces, the reflective quality of his NMM, and the sense of the real sense of warm, cold with texture. Like he did the. I mean, these things that he's doing right now are just like wow.
Yeah, the Viking recently jumps to mind, right? With that's holding the sword up to his chest. Like
Yeah,
it's amazing.
yeah. And he's one of the reasons that I use cross hatching and stippling in almost every model I paint.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, it allows for that texture to come through, and you have that differentiation of that contrast of various textures on cloth with the smoothness and organics of skin, and having that contrast spot on that. That's something that he really truly inspires me every time I look at one of his pieces. Now, I'll be honest,
All right.
comments. There's so many guys, Russo Russo, all these guys. They blow me away every time we get to talk or every time I get to see their work. So I can't really nail down a favorite, but for most influential in my artwork as I sit right now, absolutely Kirill Cannon.
And that's completely fair. I mean, we are spoiled in this age of just being able. Yeah, I every day when I open my Instagram, it's like another incredible model, another incredible model, another incredible model. You know, like it's incredible the world we live in. I count my blessings every day that there's so many incredible artists sharing their work around the world, and then we all get to see it. You know, I just think like it wasn't that long ago that they would have been out there painting that, and I would have had no ability to see it unless I happened to go to a show somewhere in the middle of Germany or something like that, right? And it's just not going to happen regularly, or if ever. So the fact that I get to actually just be inspired and see that stuff every day, that is a blessing for the world we live in.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. It is at times when you're feeling kind of like stumped in your work, looking at sometimes has a very positive and inspiring effect, but we have to be honest with ourselves in the fact that sometimes it's like, oh man, now let's be
Sure,
real,
sure,
we
sure.
can't just snap our brushes and quit. because that, I mean, why did we put our time and effort into it in the first place?
Yeah.
But we all get that moment where we go, oh,
Yeah, sure. Like, are you freaking kidding me over here? Yeah, yeah. That reaction. Yes, 100%.
Bowen does that for me a lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's such a he's an interesting guy. I'd love to talk to him sometime. I've never met him. I don't know anything about him other than obviously I know his work online. So yeah, it'd be interesting. All right.
I've heard some interesting things, but I can only say they're rumor.
Oh, okay, got it. He's very mysterious. Very mysterious. Okay. What is your favorite color of paint?
Smoke.
There you go. All right, I'll take it. That's a good answer. That is a specific answer. For everybody that's not aware, this is, I'll give everybody the specific number since I have it right. Like, I keep it right next to my desk. It's 70939. It's right here. This Vallejo smoke. You can use this as, like, just because we've both been talking it up, and I've never met anybody else who loves this color as much as me, so I'm so excited about it because you can use it as, like, subtle toning into skin. You can use it in things like wood. You can use it in things like dirt and naturalistic tones. You can use it in mud and splatter. You can use it as rust, yes, and weathering. Like, it's so multi-purpose. You can use it to just kind of desaturate reds.
To change the tones of those colors to warm,
Yeah.
without overly affecting them too much. They have a warm cast because of the sepia in
Yeah.
the smoke getting mixed into their color. And you just look and you're like, wow. And it makes such a huge contrast when it comes to temperature tonality.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, like, I mean, I would encourage people if you're trying to do something with, trying to make very realistic reds or greens, it's a great color to add into those to just make them feel so soft and kind of warm in their sort of shadow parts. Yeah. So that's a super great answer. Okay. What is your favorite type? And you can construe the word type however you want. You can mean size, it can mean, anything. Anything. However you think of the word type. What is your favorite type of minis to paint?
Larger scale busts or figures in the fantasy genre
Okay.
or the horror genre.
Yeah, there you go. I was gonna say, it feels like you've always had like a lot of your work. You liked the sort of fantasy with the horror element to it, from what we've been talking about. Like that's what sort of trips your imagination.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
every time.
No, absolutely. All right. Yeah, somebody had a question as well, and I think that we talked about earlier. So Steve and I would ask you to go back, or go back to the beginning, because I think you talked about the story like when we very much started off. Because he said, "What was your favorite aha moment in your painting career?" And I think from your story earlier, it was that moment of bringing together your art background and that. But I don't know. You might, maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was my big aha moment, was being able to connect these two separate entities of my life together, where I have modeling and I have miniature painting, and then I have fine arts, comic book drawing, uh, painting in oils and acrylics on canvas, all these various different disciplines that I learned from fine arts. And I just never, I mean, literally, that aha moment was just, why did you not? You have the training. Why are you not using it? And it was just
Right.
like, and that, I mean, that was my aha moment, was that I wasn't using it. And then it has been the journey that it is, all its ups and downs of trying to take that and consistently always apply it to what I am doing.
Makes perfect sense. Well, sir, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
awesome. I have had a great time. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to have been able to come on and just have this conversation with you. It's
Hey,
enjoy.
I'm very glad that we finally got it done, and I'm glad that we made it just before I let a year go by. And I hope that this all passes us soon enough, and I see you in person sooner rather than later.
Oh, and before we go,
Yes.
I've known Christoph Erichorn, Treverian, through the old Rackham forums all the way back to the early 2000s.
Okay.
Like we competed in the Rackham online miniature painting
Yeah.
competition. I took second and he took first. Like I have known him that long, and he's quirky, but he is a great guy, and he's extremely talented and puts in a lot of really solid work. And
Yeah.
that's something that I was watching when you were talking to Trent Dennison.
Yes.
I went back and watched that one, and Trent makes a distinct point that I pretty much I harp on people about. Um, Hard work will always beat talent.
Yep. Every time.
If you can have talent and not put the work in, and will be beat out by someone who has much less quote unquote talent, but puts in the work every single day, or just every time they put the work in. If you put in the work in and you put your practice in and you keep experimenting and pushing the envelope with every piece that you do, you will get better. But like he was also saying, churning out model
Yeah.
after
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
massive army, you set into a rhythm and you don't progress.
Yeah. You fall out of learning mode.
Right. And you have to break your mind to a point. You have to break your routine, and you have to get to a point. And one of the things that I didn't agree with was you can go too far. That's called stripper. Going too far means, okay, dump it in the stripper. Let's clean it. Let's start over. Because
Yeah.
as long as we can take the paint off, or we can erase or go over it, it's never a failure.
It's
Every little
absolutely.
thing you do is a learning experience. Whether you, oh, I went too far and probably should have stopped. Well, you know that now. Take a photo of it, strip it, do it again, and just don't make that same mistake.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely true. It's one of the things one of the words I hear people use all the time, and it drives me crazy. Is I was afraid I'll ruin it, and I'm like, ruin it? We're talking about paint. What are you doing? Paint can't ruin a model. That's not how this works, right? Like if you start sanding something down with a Dremel, you can ruin a model. Sure, like that's possible because you can grind off all the features, but like you can't. Paint doesn't do that. It's not. That's
Right.
not the thing.
If you're sculpting, you may have to take the piece and completely trash it and start over,
Right.
or toss it to the side and throw it in a drawer because of the medium that you're using. But with paint, erase it.
Right.
Just take it, dump it in the stripper, pull it out, and let's start over. And remember where we made our mistakes and make sure we don't do them again. That is the learning process. So even you can go quote unquote too far. You can go so far outside of your comfort zone that you can hit panic mode. But you know what? When you hit panic mode, take out your phone, take a picture, and then strip it. And let's go back and do it again.
Totally agree. All right. Well, absolute pleasure talking to you. For all of you out there watching, thank you so much. Give this a like. Everything for Syndjinn will be down in the description, so you can go check out all of all the socials, everything you need to find for Pikmin Studios. So go
Oh,
check that out.
Meriton, the emaciated one, the female
Yes.
Lich Queen. All sales, that is through Metal Oak Casting Studios. All proceeds, every sale of that model goes to My Brother's Keeper, which is um, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama's foundation for helping young people of color in inner city and in various programs. So if anybody wants, I really enjoyed the model, obviously because of how I painted it. I really loved it. It's a great model and it's a great cause. Please go out, buy it. They're $15. You can't beat that for a 54 millimeter scale figure.
That's incredible. I will absolutely link that down below as well so people can go directly there and check that out. That's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful note. And you're right, a absolutely fantastic deal for a very cool 54 millimeter miniature. So there you go. All right. Well, folks, thank you very much for watching. Always appreciate it. We'll see you next
Thank you for
time.
having me.